The board meeting had dragged on for 3 excruciating hours, and Kyle Anderson could barely focus on the quarterly reports being presented when Wendy Carson walked into the conference room with a stack of revised contracts. His heart did that stupid thing it always did when she entered a room, that flutter he had learned to hide behind calculated indifference over the past 2 years. She moved with quiet confidence, her auburn hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her gray eyes scanning the documents as she approached the table. She was his vice president of operations, the woman who had turned his struggling manufacturing company into a thriving enterprise, and the only person who could make him lose his train of thought with a single glance. "The revised terms from the Singapore deal," Wendy said, sliding the folder across the polished mahogany table toward him. Her fingers brushed against his accidentally, and Kyle felt electricity shoot up his arm. If she noticed, she gave no indication, already turning to address the CFO about production costs. Kyle had built Anderson Manufacturing from the ground up, turning a small automotive parts factory into a company worth over $300 million. He had negotiated deals with Fortune 500 companies, stared down hostile takeover attempts, and weathered economic downturns that had destroyed his competitors. But he could not find the courage to tell Wendy Carson that he had been in love with her since the day she walked into his office for her interview, armed with a business plan that had made him rethink his entire operational strategy. The meeting finally ended as the afternoon sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the downtown Detroit headquarters. Kyle gathered his papers slowly, watching as the other executives filed out, leaving him alone with Wendy as she organized her notes. "You seem distracted today," Wendy observed, not looking up from her laptop. "The Singapore deal has you worried." "No, you handled it perfectly," Kyle said, and he meant it. "You always do." She finally looked at him then, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "High praise from someone who once told me my first presentation was adequate at best." Kyle winced at the memory. He had been so determined to keep things professional between them that he had overcorrected, becoming cold and critical, when what he really wanted was to tell her she was brilliant. "I was an idiot. That presentation saved us $500,000 in operational costs." "I know," Wendy said, closing her laptop with a decisive click. "I kept track. We are actually up to about $40 million in savings and increased revenue from my strategies over the past 2 years. But who is counting?" "You are, apparently." Kyle found himself grinning despite the ache in his chest. This was torture, being this close to her, trading banter like colleagues when he wanted so much more. Wendy stood, smoothing down her navy blazer. "Dinner meeting with the Midwest logistics team at 7. "You are still planning to attend?" Kyle had forgotten completely. "Of course, I will meet you there." After she left, Kyle sat alone in the empty conference room staring at the city skyline. His assistant, Marcus, poked his head in. "You okay, boss? You have been acting weird all day." "Define weird," Kyle muttered, "like you are trying to solve a puzzle that does not have an answer." Marcus had been with him for 5 years and had earned the right to speak candidly. "Or like you are avoiding something." Kyle ran a hand through his dark hair, feeling every one of his 32 years. "What would you do if you had feelings for someone you work with? Someone you could not risk losing?" Marcus leaned against the doorframe, considering. "Is this about Wendy? That obvious?" "Man, the entire office knows you are crazy about her. Everyone except apparently Wendy herself." Marcus shrugged. "You should tell her. The worst thing she can say is no." "The worst thing she can say is no. And then I lose the best VP of operations in the industry, because things become awkward. And she decides to take one of the dozen offers she probably gets every month from competitors." Or, Marcus suggested, she says yes, and you stop moping around like a lovesick teenager. Kyle threw a pen at him, which Marcus dodged easily. Get out of my office. This is the conference room. Then get out of my conference room. The dinner meeting was being held at Forge, an upscale steakhouse in the heart of downtown. Kyle arrived early, loosening his tie as he reviewed his notes on his phone. The Midwest logistics account was crucial, a $12 million contract that would expand their distribution network across 5 states. Wendy had been cultivating the relationship for months, and tonight was meant to seal the deal. She arrived exactly on time, because of course she did. She had changed from her work blazer into a burgundy dress that made Kyle forget how to breathe. It was professional enough for a business dinner, but elegant in a way that made him realize he rarely saw her outside the confines of tailored suits and conference rooms. "You are staring," Wendy said quietly as she reached his side. "You look different," Kyle managed, feeling like an idiot. "I look like someone who owns clothing that is not exclusively gray or navy blue," she replied, but there was something in her expression he could not quite read. Amusement, maybe, or something else entirely. The Midwest logistics team arrived in a flurry of handshakes and loud voices. Robert Chen, their CEO, was a gregarious man in his 50s who loved to talk about his grandchildren and had a weakness for expensive scotch. His operations director, Patricia Owens, was sharp-eyed and detail-oriented, the real decision-maker despite Robert's larger personality. The dinner went smoothly. Wendy was in her element, answering questions with practiced ease, deflecting concerns with facts and figures she seemed to pull from thin air. Kyle found himself watching her more than contributing, content to let her shine. This was her deal, her victory. "You have got yourself a real asset there," Robert said to Kyle during a lull in the conversation, nodding toward Wendy, who was deep in discussion with Patricia about shipping routes. "Sharp as a tack and does not take any nonsense. Where did you find her?" "She found me," Kyle admitted. "Walked into my office 2 years ago and told me my entire operational structure was inefficient." Robert laughed. "And you hired her?" "After I stopped being insulted, I realized she was right about everything." Kyle watched Wendy gesture animatedly, explaining something to Patricia. "Best decision I ever made. Sounds like you appreciate her more than she knows." Robert gave him a knowing look. "Son, I have been in business for 30 years, and I have learned that life is too short for regrets. If there is something you need to say to someone, say it. The deals will still be there tomorrow, but the people might not be." Before Kyle could respond, Wendy caught his eye from across the table, raising an eyebrow in question. He gave her a subtle thumbs up, and she smiled, that rare, genuine smile that made his pulse race. By the end of the night, they had the contract. Patricia and Robert signed the preliminary agreements over dessert, promising to have their legal team finalize everything by the end of the week. Kyle picked up the check despite Robert's protests, and they all parted ways with firm handshakes and promises to stay in touch. Kyle and Wendy stood on the sidewalk outside the restaurant, the spring evening surprisingly mild for Detroit. The city lights reflected off the glass towers surrounding them, and somewhere in the distance, music drifted from one of the nearby bars. "That was perfect," Kyle said. "You were perfect." Wendy tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, looking pleased. "It was a team effort." "No, it was not. That was all you, and we both know it." Kyle shoved his hands in his pockets to keep from reaching for her. "You should be running your own company." "Maybe someday," Wendy said, "but I like where I am now. Even with a boss who once told you your presentation was merely adequate." She laughed, the sound warming something deep in his chest. "Especially with a boss who pushes me to be better. You challenge me, Kyle. That is not something I would give up easily. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the flow of pedestrians and traffic creating a cocoon around them. Kyle knew he should offer to get her a cab, should say goodnight and maintain the professional boundary they had carefully constructed. Instead, he heard himself say, "Want to take a walk? I am too wound up to go home yet." Wendy hesitated and Kyle prepared himself for rejection. Then she nodded. Okay, but fair warning, these heels were not made for long distances. They walked along the Riverwalk, the Detroit River stretching dark and wide beside them. The Renaissance Center glowed in the distance, and across the water, the lights of Windsor, Canada, twinkled like stars. It was peaceful here, away from the bustle of the business district. "Can I ask you something?" Wendy said after they had been walking for several minutes. "Why did you really hire me? I have always wondered." Kyle considered his answer carefully. "Because you were right, about all of it. The inefficiencies, the waste, the missed opportunities. I had built the company through sheer determination and stubbornness, but I had hit a ceiling. You showed me how to break through it." "That is the professional answer," Wendy observed. "What is the real answer?" He looked at her, this woman who had become so essential to his life that he could not imagine a day without seeing her, without hearing her laugh or watching her demolish someone's weak argument in a meeting. "Because when you walked into my office, you looked me in the eye and told me I was making mistakes. No one had done that in years. Everyone was too intimidated or too worried about their jobs. But you just laid it all out, fearless and honest. I knew right then that you were either going to save my company or drive me completely insane. And which did I do? Both." Kyle stopped walking, turning to face her. The words were trying to climb out of his throat, the confession he had been holding back for 2 years. "Wendy, I need to tell you something." She looked up at him, her gray eyes reflecting the lights from the city. "What is it?" His phone rang, shattering the moment. Kyle swore under his breath, seeing Marcus's name on the screen. "I am sorry, I have to take this." Marcus would not call unless it was important. "Kyle, we have got a problem," Marcus said without preamble. There was a fire at the Sterling Heights facility. No injuries, but significant damage to the production floor. The bottom dropped out of Kyle's stomach. Sterling Heights was their largest manufacturing plant, responsible for 60% of their output. "How significant?" "Enough that we are going to be offline for at least a week, maybe 2. The fire marshal is there now investigating the cause." Kyle closed his eyes, calculating the implications. Delayed orders, penalty clauses, potential loss of clients. "I am on my way. Call an emergency meeting with the department heads for first thing tomorrow morning, and get our insurance adjuster on the phone tonight." He ended the call and looked at Wendy, who had clearly overheard enough to understand the situation. "I have to go." "I am coming with you," she said, already pulling out her own phone. "I will call the production managers and get a preliminary assessment of which orders are going to be affected." They made it to Sterling Heights in 20 minutes, Kyle driving faster than was strictly legal while Wendy worked her phone, fielding calls and sending rapid-fire emails. By the time they arrived, 3 fire trucks were still on site, and the acrid smell of smoke hung heavy in the air. The damage was worse than Kyle had feared. The entire western section of the production floor was gutted, expensive machinery reduced to twisted metal and melted plastic. The fire marshal, a weathered woman named Janet Rodriguez, walked them through the initial findings. "Looks like it started in one of the older machines, electrical malfunction," she explained. "Your sprinkler system kept it from spreading to the rest of the building, but everything in this section is a total loss." Kyle stood amid the destruction, feeling the weight of it settle on his shoulders. 200 employees worked at this facility. Orders worth millions of dollars were now in jeopardy. He had spent years building Anderson Manufacturing into something stable and successful, and in one night it felt like it could all slip away. Kyle. Wendy's voice cut through his spiral. She was looking at her tablet, her expression focused. I have been running the numbers. If we shift production to the River Rouge facility and add a night shift at the Dearborn plant, we can maintain about 70% of our output. It is not ideal, but it will keep us from defaulting on the major contracts. River Rouge is already running at capacity, Kyle said. Not if we postpone the Hendricks order by 2 weeks. I already called them. They are willing to accommodate given the circumstances. She turned the tablet toward him, showing him a revised production schedule that she must have created in the past 20 minutes. It is going to cost us in overtime, and some of the smaller clients will experience delays, but we can survive this. Kyle stared at the screen, then at Wendy. While he had been panicking, she had been solving the problem. This is brilliant. This is my job, she corrected, but he could see the worry in her eyes too. We should get back to the office. If we are doing this, we need to start making calls now. The managers need time to adjust schedules before tomorrow. They worked through the night, converting a conference room into a makeshift command center. Kyle called clients personally, explaining the situation and negotiating new timelines. Wendy coordinated with the production managers, reorganizing shifts and reallocating resources. Marcus ordered pizza at midnight and kept the coffee flowing. By the time the sun rose, they had a plan. It was not perfect, but it was viable. The department heads began arriving for the emergency meeting at 6 in the morning, and Kyle walked them through the revised strategy. There were concerns, complaints about the logistics of adding night shifts and redistributing work, but ultimately everyone agreed it could work. The meeting ended around 8. Kyle dismissed everyone except Wendy. They sat alone in the conference room surrounded by empty coffee cups and scattered papers, both exhausted but too wired to leave. Thank you, Kyle said, for all of this, for having answers when I did not. Wendy leaned back in her chair, rubbing her eyes. We are a team, Kyle. That is how this works. You have my back, I have yours. You have saved this company more times than I can count. I do not know what I would do without you. Lucky for you, you do not have to find out. She looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. What were you going to tell me last night? Before Marcus called, Kyle's heart started hammering. He was exhausted, emotionally drained from the crisis of the past 12 hours. His defenses were down, his carefully constructed walls crumbling. It can wait, Kyle. Wendy's voice was gentle. Just say it. He stood, walking to the window to avoid looking at her. The city was waking up, people hurrying to work, oblivious to the small drama playing out in this conference room. I have been in love with you since the day you walked into my office and told me I was doing everything wrong. I have spent 2 years trying to be professional, trying to be the boss you deserve instead of the man who cannot stop thinking about you. Last night, watching you handle that dinner, seeing you take charge during the fire crisis, I realized I cannot keep pretending. I am in love with you, Wendy. Completely, hopelessly in love with you. And I know this probably makes everything complicated and uncomfortable, but I could not go another day without telling you the truth. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Kyle kept his eyes on the city, afraid to turn around, afraid to see pity or awkwardness or rejection in her face. You are an idiot, Wendy said finally. Kyle winced. I know, I am sorry. I should not have said anything. We can pretend this conversation never happened and just go back to Kyle, turn around. He did, slowly. Wendy was standing now, her arms crossed, but there were tears in her eyes. I have been in love with you for 2 years, she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Since the day you hired me despite the fact that I basically called you incompetent in our first meeting. Since the day you took my suggestions seriously instead of being offended. Since the first time you smiled at me like I had actually impressed you, which took weeks, by the way. I have watched you build this company, fight for your employees, refuse to compromise your integrity even when it would have been easier. And I have wanted to tell you 1,000 times how I felt, but I thought you only saw me as an employee, as someone useful, but nothing more." Kyle could not breathe. "What? You are brilliant and kind and infuriating, and you push me to be better every single day. I love working with you. But more than that, I love you. I love the way you pace when you are thinking, and how you always bring coffee to the Monday meetings, and how you never take credit for ideas that were not yours. I love that you actually care about people, not just profits. I love everything about you, and I have been breaking my heart over it because I thought it was completely one-sided." Kyle crossed the room in 3 strides, cupping her face in his hands. "It was never one-sided, not for a single second." Wendy laughed, a sound somewhere between relief and disbelief. "We are both idiots then." "Agreed," Kyle said, and then he kissed her. It was like coming home after years of being lost. Wendy's arms came around his neck, and she kissed him back with an intensity that made his knees weak. 2 years of wanting, of restraint, of professional distance dissolved in that moment. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Kyle rested his forehead against hers. "I cannot believe we wasted 2 years," he murmured. "We did not waste them," Wendy said. "We built something together. The company, our partnership, the trust, all of that matters. It just means we have a stronger foundation now. Practical even in matters of the heart. This is why I love you," she grinned. "Someone has to be. You are clearly too busy making dramatic declarations." They kissed again, softer this time, taking their time. When they finally separated, reality began creeping back in. They were still in the office, still dealing with a crisis, still employer and employee despite everything that had just changed. "We need to talk about how this works," Wendy said, voicing his thoughts. "The professional side of things." Kyle nodded reluctantly. "HR is going to have a field day, probably. But we are both adults, and it is not like this is a secret affair. We just need to be transparent about it." Wendy bit her lip. "Although I do not want to give up my position, I have worked hard to get here, and I am not going to let people think I am only here because of our relationship. No one would ever think that. You have earned your place 10 times over." Kyle took her hand. "But you are right. We need to do this properly. Full disclosure to HR, maybe set some boundaries about what is professional and what is personal." "Can we table that conversation for a few hours?" Wendy asked. "I need coffee, a shower, and about 12 hours of sleep. Not necessarily in that order." Kyle glanced at his watch, surprised to find it was barely 9 in the morning. "Go home. Rest. We have done all we can do today. The managers will handle the implementation. What about you? I will go home too. We are no good to anyone if we collapse from exhaustion." He squeezed her hand. "But tonight, have dinner with me. A real date, not a business meeting." Wendy's smile was radiant despite her obvious fatigue. "I would love that." They left the office together, drawing a few curious looks from early arriving employees but too tired to care. Kyle walked Wendy to her car, kissing her goodbye like a teenager, reluctant to let her leave even though they would see each other in a few hours. The exhaustion hit him the moment he got home to his downtown loft. Kyle barely made it to his bedroom before collapsing onto the bed, asleep before his head hit the pillow. He woke 6 hours later to sunlight streaming through the windows and a text from Wendy. "Production shift at River Rouge is running smoothly. Dearborn night shift starts at 6. Also, I cannot stop smiling. People at the grocery store think I am insane. Kyle grinned at his phone, typing back. Same, except I am smiling in my sleep apparently. My neighbor asked if I won the lottery. Close enough. Pick me up at 7. I will be there at 6:55. Kyle showered and shaved, taking more care with his appearance than he had in months. He chose dark jeans and a blue button-down, wanting to look nice without being too formal. This was Wendy, after all. She had seen him at his worst, exhausted and stressed and occasionally unreasonable. But tonight was different. Tonight was not about business or crisis management. Tonight was about them. He arrived at her apartment in Midtown at exactly 6:55, carrying a bouquet of tulips, because roses felt too cliché, and he remembered her mentioning once that tulips were her favorite. Wendy answered the door in a green dress that brought out the color in her eyes, her hair loose around her shoulders for once. "You look beautiful," Kyle said, handing her the flowers. "You remembered." Wendy buried her face in the tulips, looking pleased. "Come in for a second while I put these in water." Her apartment was exactly what he had imagined. Neat and organized, but with personal touches that revealed who she was beyond the office. Books everywhere, photographs of what looked like family vacations, a collection of vintage maps framed on one wall. It was warm and inviting, so completely Wendy that Kyle felt privileged to be allowed inside. "My secret weakness," Wendy said, noticing him looking at the maps. "I collect them from antique stores. Something about seeing how people used to view the world fascinates me. I never knew that. There is a lot we do not know about each other outside of work," she pointed out, arranging the tulips in a simple vase. "I guess we get to learn now." Kyle had made reservations at a small Italian restaurant in Greektown, the kind of place that did not cater to the business crowd. It was intimate and quiet, with checkered tablecloths and candles that flickered in old wine bottles. Perfect for a first real date. They talked about everything except work. Kyle learned that Wendy had grown up in Ann Arbor, the middle child of 5 with 2 older brothers and 2 younger sisters. She had played soccer in college until a knee injury sidelined her. She loved cooking but rarely had time for it. She had always wanted to visit New Zealand and had a slight obsession with true crime podcasts. "Your turn," Wendy said after the waiter brought their entrees. "Tell me something about Kyle Anderson that is not in your official bio." Kyle thought about it, twirling pasta on his fork. "I wanted to be an architect when I was a kid. I used to spend hours building elaborate structures out of whatever I could find. Legos, blocks, cardboard boxes. My mom said I was always creating something. What changed? My dad died when I was 16. Heart attack, completely unexpected. He had worked in the auto industry his whole life, a line worker at one of the big plants. After he died, I saw how little security we had, how close we came to losing everything because he had not been high enough up to have real benefits or savings. I decided then that I wanted to build something that would last, something that could provide real stability for people. Not just for me, but for families like mine." Wendy reached across the table, taking his hand. "Anderson Manufacturing is not just a company to you, it is your dad's legacy. And a promise I made to myself that other families would not have to go through what we did. It is why I have always prioritized employee benefits, why I have fought against layoffs, even when it would have been financially easier." Kyle looked at their joined hands. "It is probably why I am so intense about work, too intense sometimes. Not too intense, passionate. There is a difference." Wendy squeezed his fingers. "Your employees are lucky to have you, even if you do occasionally reject perfectly good presentations as merely adequate." Kyle groaned. "I am never going to live that down, am I? Never. It is my cross to bear, being in love with a man who once questioned my spreadsheet methodology. Your spreadsheet methodology was overly complicated. It was thorough. They were both laughing now, the easy camaraderie they had always shared at work transforming into something deeper, more intimate. This was what Kyle had dreamed about for 2 years, being able to be with Wendy not as boss and employee, but as equals, as partners in something beyond business. After dinner, they walked through the streets of Greektown, past the restaurants and bars, the noise and life of the city surrounding them. Kyle kept Wendy's hand tucked in his, unwilling to let go. "So what happens now?" Wendy asked as they paused outside a coffee shop. "Tomorrow, we go back to the office and face everyone. Tomorrow, we go back to the office and tell HR that we are in a relationship. We set up whatever protocols they need to ensure there is no conflict of interest. And then we keep doing what we have always done, which is run the best manufacturing company in Detroit." Kyle turned to face her, serious now. "But we do it as partners, in every sense of the word." "I am not giving up my position," Wendy said firmly. "I have earned it." "I would not dream of asking you to. You are the best VP of operations I have ever seen. The company needs you, I need you." Kyle cupped her face gently. "But I need you as Wendy too, not just as my employee. Can we balance both?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "It will not always be easy, but yes. We have been balancing the professional and personal for 2 years already. We just get to acknowledge it now." Kyle kissed her there on the busy street, not caring who saw. When they parted, Wendy was blushing, which he found adorable. "Take me home?" she asked softly. They ended up back at Kyle's loft, which was admittedly nicer than her apartment given that he was the CEO of a multimillion-dollar company. Wendy walked around the open space, taking in the modern furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the Detroit skyline. "This is intimidating," she said. "Your place is like something out of a magazine." "It is just a place," Kyle said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "It has never felt like home until right now." Wendy turned in his arms, looking up at him. "You are unexpectedly romantic for a CEO who spends most of his time analyzing profit margins. You bring it out in me." They ended up on the couch, talking until well past midnight. It was strange and wonderful, being able to touch her freely, to kiss her whenever he wanted, to not have to maintain that professional distance that had been slowly killing him for 2 years. Wendy fell asleep eventually, her head on his shoulder, and Kyle just held her, feeling more content than he had in years. His alarm went off at 5:30, a cruel reminder that they still had a company to run and a crisis to manage. Wendy stirred, blinking up at him sleepily. "Good morning," Kyle said, brushing hair from her face. "Is it morning already? That seems cruel." She sat up, stretching. "I should go home and change before work. Or you could borrow some clothes and we could go in together, make a statement." Wendy considered this. "You just want to scandalize Marcus. Marcus already knows how I feel about you. He will be insufferably smug about being right, but he will get over it." They arrived at the office together at 7:30, both wearing business attire but unable to hide the fact that they were clearly together. Marcus took one look at them and broke into a huge grin. "Finally," he exclaimed. "I was beginning to think I would have to lock you two in a conference room." "Professional boundaries, Marcus," Kyle said, but he was grinning too. "Right, because you two look real professional right now." Marcus was practically bouncing. "Does this mean I win the office pool?" "There is an office pool?" Wendy asked, horrified. "Oh, honey, there has been an office pool for over a year. Most people thought it would happen at the company Christmas party." "I bet on spring, so thank you for the $200. Kyle and Wendy exchanged glances. "Our employees bet on our love life," Wendy said slowly. Your incredibly obvious love life, Marcus corrected. Everyone knew, well, everyone except apparently you too. Now, are we going to discuss this fascinating development or do you have actual work for me? HR, Kyle said. Set up a meeting with Jennifer immediately. We need to file disclosure paperwork. Marcus saluted mockingly. On it, boss, and congratulations, by the way. You two are genuinely perfect for each other. The meeting with Jennifer Washington, the head of HR, was surprisingly straightforward. She listened to their explanation, made notes, and pulled up the relevant company policies. As long as you disclose the relationship and maintain professional boundaries at work, there is no policy against this, Jennifer explained. Wendy, you will need to have your performance reviews conducted by someone else to avoid any appearance of favoritism. I would suggest the CFO. We will also need to establish clear channels for complaints in case any employees feel uncomfortable. Will this affect my position? Wendy asked. Jennifer looked surprised. Why would it? You have earned your role based on merit and performance. The fact that you are in a relationship with Kyle does not change your qualifications. As long as business decisions are made objectively and transparently, I see no issue. The relief on Wendy's face was palpable. They signed the necessary paperwork, agreed to the new review procedures, and left Jennifer's office officially sanctioned as a couple. That was easier than I expected, Wendy admitted as they walked back toward their offices. Did you really think I would let anything jeopardize your career? Kyle asked. You have worked too hard. I know you would not intentionally, but sometimes perception matters as much as reality in business. Wendy paused outside her office door. I need to make some calls about the Sterling Heights situation. The insurance adjuster is supposed to have preliminary numbers today. Kyle wanted to pull her into his office and kiss her senseless, but they were at work now and boundaries mattered. Keep me updated. I am meeting with the bank about the reconstruction loan at 11. Kyle. Wendy said as he started to walk away. Yeah, thank you for everything. For last night, for this morning, for making this work. We are making it work, Kyle corrected. Together. That is how we do things, remember, the next few weeks were a whirlwind. The Sterling Heights facility required complete reconstruction of the damaged section, a process that would take months. Kyle secured the necessary funding, though it strained their reserves. Wendy's reorganization of production kept them afloat, though everyone was working overtime to maintain output levels. Through it all, Kyle and Wendy navigated their new relationship with the same competence they brought to business challenges. At work, they were professional, collaborative, focused on the company's success. But after hours, they were finally free to be themselves. They had dinner together most nights, alternating between Wendy's apartment and Kyle's loft. They took a weekend trip to Traverse City, walking along the beaches and exploring the wineries, just enjoying being together without the pressure of work. Kyle met Wendy's family on a Sunday afternoon in Ann Arbor. Her parents, William and Charlotte, were warm and welcoming, if slightly overprotective. Her brothers, Wesley and Warren, grilled Kyle about his intentions while her sisters, Willa and Winona, interrogated Wendy about every detail of their relationship. It was chaotic and loud and wonderful, everything Kyle's own small family had not been after his father died. Your family is amazing, Kyle told Wendy on the drive back to Detroit. They are overwhelming, Wendy corrected, but she was smiling. Warren was way too intense with the whole "what are your intentions" routine. His intentions are to make sure I am good enough for his sister. I respect that. Kyle glanced at her. Am I good enough for you? Wendy laughed. You run a multimillion-dollar company, you treat your employees like family, and you brought my mom tulips even though you just met her. Yes, Kyle, you are more than good enough. I just want to make you happy. You do. Every day. 6 months after the Sterling Heights fire, the facility reopened with a ceremony celebrating the reconstruction. It had been a brutal half-year of long hours and difficult decisions, but they had made it through. The company had not only survived but had grown stronger, their client relationships deepened by their transparency and commitment to fulfilling obligations despite the setback. Kyle stood at the podium, looking out at the gathered employees, local officials, and media representatives. But his eyes kept finding Wendy, standing to the side with the other executives. She gave him an encouraging smile, and he felt his nerves settle. 6 months ago, this building nearly destroyed everything we had built, Kyle began. But it did not. Because this company is not just a building or machines or production schedules. Anderson Manufacturing is people. The employees who worked overtime to keep us running. The managers who reorganized entire systems on the fly. The team that refused to give up. He gestured to Wendy. Our VP of Operations, Wendy Carson, designed and implemented a production strategy that kept us operational during our darkest hour. She saved jobs, saved contracts, and saved this company. I cannot thank her enough for her dedication and brilliance. Wendy looked surprised by the public recognition, and Kyle could see her blushing even from a distance. After the ceremony, during the reception, she cornered him by the refreshment table. That was quite a speech, she said, just the truth. You did save the company. We saved it together. Wendy glanced around to make sure no one was listening. You know the whole office still talks about us, right? 6 months later and people are still fascinated. Let them talk. We have nothing to hide. Kyle Anderson, are you getting comfortable with office gossip? I am getting comfortable with the idea that people know I am incredibly in love with you. Kyle lowered his voice. In fact, I am more than comfortable with it. I want everyone to know. We are at a work event, Wendy reminded him, but she was smiling. Then come to dinner with me tonight. I want to talk to you about something important. Wendy's eyes widened. That sounds ominous. Not ominous. Just important. They went to the same Italian restaurant in Greektown where they had their first date. Kyle had requested the same table, and the waiter recognized them with a smile. Over pasta and wine, they talked about the reopening, about production schedules, and the new accounts Wendy was negotiating. But Kyle's mind was on the ring box in his jacket pocket. You are distracted, Wendy observed, setting down her fork. What is on your mind? Kyle took a deep breath. This was scarier than any business negotiation, more terrifying than any board meeting. I have been thinking about the future. The company's future, my future, our future. Okay, Wendy said slowly, that is appropriately vague. I want to make you a partner. A full partner in Anderson Manufacturing, not just VP of Operations. Equal ownership, equal decision-making authority. You have earned it 1,000 times over, and honestly, the company runs better when we are making decisions together. Wendy stared at him. Kyle, that is your father's legacy. You built that company from nothing. I built it from nothing, and you helped me turn it into something extraordinary. You should have a stake in what we have created together. Kyle reached across the table, taking her hand. But more than that, I want you to be my partner in everything. Business, life, all of it. He pulled out the ring box, opening it to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. Wendy's hand flew to her mouth. Marry me, Wendy. Be my partner in every way that matters. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love someone. You challenge me and support me and make me want to be better. I cannot imagine my life without you in it. So please marry me. Tears were streaming down Wendy's face, but she was smiling. You are proposing to me in the same restaurant where we had our first date. I am a sentimental man. Is that a yes? Yes, "You impossible man. Yes, I will marry you. Yes to all of it." Kyle slid the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her as the other diners erupted in applause. It was perfect and public and completely them. "Partnership papers and a marriage proposal in one night," Wendy said when they finally sat back down. "You do not do anything halfway, do you? Not when it comes to you." They spent the rest of dinner planning. A small wedding, probably in Ann Arbor so Wendy's large family could attend. Spring, maybe, when the weather was nice. Nothing too elaborate, just the people who mattered most. "What about work?" Wendy asked as they walked back to Kyle's car. "People are going to talk even more now. Let them. We have done everything by the book. Full disclosure, transparent business practices, separate review procedures. Anyone who questions your role in the company will have to answer to a decade of performance data that proves you belong there." Kyle stopped, turning to face her under the streetlights. "Besides, once we file the partnership papers, you will be co-owner. No one can question your position then." "Co-owner," Wendy repeated like she was testing out the words. "That is going to take some getting used to. You have been acting like a co-owner for 2 years. This just makes it official." The announcement of their engagement and Wendy's new partnership in the company came simultaneously. Kyle held a company-wide meeting, explaining that Wendy's contributions had earned her a 50% stake in Anderson Manufacturing. The partnership papers were already filed. It was done. Some people were surprised, but most were supportive. Wendy's performance record spoke for itself. She had increased efficiency by 40%, brought in dozens of new accounts, and saved the company from potential bankruptcy during the Sterling Heights crisis. Anyone who questioned her qualifications quickly found themselves facing overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Marcus, predictably, was overjoyed. "My 2 favorite people are getting married and running a company together. This is the best timeline." Planning the wedding was chaotic, mostly because Wendy's family insisted on being involved in every decision. Her mother had opinions about flowers. Her sisters debated dress styles. Her brothers appointed themselves in charge of vetting Kyle even though he had already proposed. Kyle found it endearing, this loud, loving family that Wendy had grown up in. His own mother, quiet and reserved, seemed bemused by the chaos but happy for her son. They got married on a Saturday in May, in a small church in Ann Arbor. Wendy wore a simple white dress that made Kyle forget how to breathe. Her father walked her down the aisle, and Kyle saw tears in the older man's eyes as he handed his daughter over. "You take care of her," William said quietly. "Every day for the rest of my life," Kyle promised. The ceremony was short and sweet, full of laughter and tears. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Kyle kissed Wendy like they were the only 2 people in the world. The reception was held in a garden venue, spring flowers in full bloom, and Kyle spent the entire evening unable to stop smiling. "You look happy," Wendy said as they danced to their first song as husband and wife. "I am married to the most brilliant, beautiful woman I have ever met. Happy does not even begin to cover it, smooth talker." But Wendy was grinning too. "I love you, Kyle Anderson." "I love you too, Wendy Anderson." "Oh, I am keeping Carson professionally. We already filed all the partnership papers under that name." "Fine, Wendy Carson Anderson. Now you are just making up names." They honeymooned in New Zealand, finally fulfilling Wendy's dream of visiting. 2 weeks of hiking, exploring, and not thinking about work at all. It was blissful and necessary, a chance to just be together without the constant pressure of running a company. When they returned to Detroit, it was to a company that was thriving. The Sterling Heights facility was operating at full capacity. New contracts were rolling in steadily. Anderson Manufacturing had weathered the storm and come out stronger for it. Kyle and Wendy settled into their new roles as co-owners and partners in every sense. They bought a house in Bloomfield Hills, something with space for the future they were planning. Wendy's family descended en masse to help them move, which mostly meant her brothers arguing about furniture placement while her sisters unpacked kitchen boxes with ruthless efficiency. "Your family is intense," Kyle told Wendy after everyone had finally left. "You married into them, no take-backs." "Would not dream of it." A year after their wedding, Wendy walked into Kyle's office with a small wrapped box. "I have news," she said, closing the door behind her. Kyle looked up from his computer, immediately focused on her. "What kind of news?" "The kind that means we are going to need to use that third bedroom sooner than we planned." She handed him the box. Kyle opened it to find a positive pregnancy test. He stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at Wendy with wonder. "Really? Really? Due in about 7 months, according to the doctor." Wendy bit her lip. "Are you happy?" Kyle stood, crossing to her and pulling her into his arms. "Happy does not even begin to cover it." "We are having a baby." "We are having a baby," Wendy repeated, and Kyle could hear the awe in her voice. The pregnancy was relatively smooth, though Wendy insisted on working right up until the last possible moment. Kyle fussed over her constantly, which she found both endearing and annoying in equal measure. They converted the third bedroom into a nursery, painting it a soft yellow since they had decided to be surprised by the gender. Their daughter, Catherine Charlotte Anderson, was born on a cold January morning. She had Wendy's gray eyes and Kyle's dark hair, and from the moment Kyle held her, he knew his life would never be the same. "She is perfect," Wendy said from the hospital bed, watching Kyle cradle their daughter. "She is, just like her mother." Kyle looked up, feeling tears prick his eyes. "Thank you for her, for everything, for giving me a family. We made this together, remember? That is how we do things." Catherine was 6 months old when Wendy approached Kyle about expanding the company. They were sitting in their home office, Catherine asleep in a bassinet nearby, reviewing quarterly reports. "What if we opened a second location?" Wendy said. "Chicago, maybe. The market analysis looks promising and we have the capital after the last fiscal year." Kyle considered it. A second location meant more risk, but also more growth potential. "Would you want to oversee it?" "I was thinking we could hire a general manager and take turns supervising. I am not ready to spend weeks away from Catherine, but I do not want to stop growing the business either." They spent the next hour mapping out possibilities, falling into the easy collaborative rhythm that had defined their partnership from the beginning. This was what Kyle loved most, working with Wendy, building something together that was bigger than either of them alone. The Chicago facility opened 2 years later, a massive undertaking that nearly consumed them but ultimately proved successful. Anderson Manufacturing became Anderson Manufacturing Group, a regional presence with 2 locations and over 500 employees. Wendy managed both facilities with her usual competence, while somehow also being an amazing mother to Catherine. Kyle stood in the new Chicago facility during the opening ceremony, watching Wendy give a speech about growth and opportunity. She was incredible, juggling motherhood and business leadership without breaking a sweat. Their daughter sat on his hip, babbling happily and pulling at his tie. "Mama," Catherine said, pointing at Wendy. "That is right. That is Mama. She is pretty amazing, is not she?" "Mama amazing," Catherine agreed, because she was 2 and liked to repeat everything. After the ceremony, Wendy found them in the crowd. "How did I do?" "Perfect, as always." Kyle kissed her, mindless of the watching employees. "Ready to go home, more than ready. Chicago is nice, but Detroit is home." They drove back that evening, Catherine falling asleep in her car seat while Kyle and Wendy talked about the future. More growth, maybe another baby in a year or two, definitely taking more vacations as a family. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not told you how I felt?" Kyle asked as they crossed the Michigan state line. "Probably would have spent another decade pining for each other until one of us finally broke," Wendy said. "Or Marcus would have locked us in a conference room like he threatened. Remind me to give Marcus a raise. You already gave him a raise for being right about us. Then another one. He earned it." Catherine woke up as they pulled into their driveway, immediately demanding snacks and stories. Kyle carried her inside while Wendy grabbed their bags, the perfect picture of domestic chaos. This was their life now, so different from those early days when Kyle had been too afraid to admit his feelings. Later that night, after Catherine was asleep and they were finally alone, Kyle pulled Wendy into his arms. "I love you," he said simply. "I love this life we have built, the company, our daughter, everything. I love you too, even when you reject my perfectly good presentations. That was one time 6 years ago, and I will never let you forget it." Wendy kissed him, smiling against his lips. "But seriously, thank you for taking that chance, for telling me how you felt. I cannot imagine my life any other way now. Neither can I." 5 years later, Anderson Manufacturing Group had 4 locations across the Midwest and was approaching $1 billion in annual revenue. Kyle and Wendy had 2 more children, twin boys named Kieran and Kellen, who kept them constantly entertained and exhausted. Catherine was 7 and already showing signs of inheriting her mother's business acumen, often asking about the company and how things worked. They still worked together every day, still challenged and supported each other, still made every major decision as true partners. The company continued to grow, but it never lost the family atmosphere that Kyle had always insisted on. Employee retention was the highest in the industry, benefits were generous, and Anderson Manufacturing Group had been named one of the best places to work in Michigan 3 years running. Kyle stood in their backyard one summer evening, watching Wendy help Catherine with a business plan for a lemonade stand while the twins played in their sandbox. This was success, he thought, not the money or the accolades or the growing empire. This. His family, his partner, the life they had built together. Wendy caught his eye and smiled, that same smile that had been making his heart race for almost a decade. Some things never changed, and Kyle was grateful for that. He walked over, dropping a kiss on the top of her head. "What was that for?" Wendy asked. "Do I need a reason to kiss my wife?" "Daddy is being mushy again," Catherine announced. "Your father is very mushy," Wendy agreed, but she was grinning. "Only for you guys," Kyle said, ruffling Catherine's hair. "Only for my girls." "And the boys," Kieran added indignantly from the sandbox. "And the boys, my whole family." That night, after the kids were in bed, Kyle and Wendy sat on their back porch with glasses of wine, enjoying the quiet. Stars were visible above them, a rare treat in the suburbs. "You ever miss it?" Kyle asked. "The early days when it was just us against the world fighting to save the company," Wendy considered this. "Sometimes. There was a certain intensity to it, an urgency, but I would not trade what we have now for anything. This is better. Calmer maybe, but richer. No regrets." "Not a single one." Kyle thought about the scared, lonely man he had been before Wendy walked into his life. The one who threw himself into work to avoid dealing with feelings, who had built walls so high he almost missed out on the love of his life. "No regrets. Except maybe waiting 2 years to tell you how I felt. We got there eventually. That is what matters." Wendy leaned against his shoulder. "Besides, think about everything we built in those 2 years, the foundation that made everything else possible. Always looking at the practical side." Someone has to. You are still too busy making dramatic declarations. Kyle laughed, pulling her closer. I love you, Wendy Anderson. Best business decision I ever made was hiring you. Best personal decision was admitting I loved you. And I love you, even though you once questioned my spreadsheet methodology. Your spreadsheet methodology was overly complicated. It was thorough. They were still arguing good-naturedly when they went inside, hands linked, partners in every way that mattered. The company would still be there tomorrow, with its challenges and opportunities and constant demands. But tonight was theirs, just the two of them, the CEO and the woman who had walked into his office 6 years ago and changed everything. Kyle thought about that young man who had been too afraid to risk everything by admitting his feelings. He had thought he was protecting himself, protecting Wendy, protecting the company. But really, he had just been scared. Scared that she would not feel the same, that he would lose her, that he would end up alone. He had been wrong. Wendy had been feeling the same all along, just as scared, just as worried about risking their partnership. 2 years of unnecessary pain because neither of them had the courage to speak up, but they had found their way to each other eventually. They had built a company, a family, a life together. They had weathered crises and celebrated victories, always as partners, always together. Kyle looked at the woman sleeping beside him, still beautiful, still brilliant, still the best thing that ever happened to him. He thought about their children down the hall, about the company they had built, about the future stretching out before them full of possibilities. This was happiness. This was success. Not the money or the power or the recognition. Just this. Love, partnership, family, and a future built together. And it had all started because he finally found the courage to admit what he had been feeling all along. To take that leap of faith and trust that Wendy might feel the same. She had. She always had. They just needed to be brave enough to say it. Kyle smiled in the darkness, holding his wife close, grateful for every moment that had led them here. The unrequited love that had never actually been unrequited at all. The confession that changed everything. The partnership that became so much more. He fell asleep content, dreaming of the future they would continue building together, one day at a time, always partners, always in love, exactly as they were meant to be.